Good morning and welcome to ASL's HR in 10.
At 10.
I'm Jason Perry,
And I'm Kimberly Bradshaw.
and each week we talk to you about what's going on in the wonderful world of human resources and employment. So, Kimberly, it's week of Valentine's. Has that kind of got your attention?
It absolutely has. There's a lot of data out there about romantic encounters with colleagues.
Mm,
I've worked in organisations where there's been shenanigans, shall we say. I think it's quite a cheery topic compared to some of the things we talk about.
Do you know, one of the things that really strikes me, and I've got a few grey hairs now, and I remember when I started in my career in HR, it was quite normal for employers to say, we wouldn't employ two members of the same family or people who have it in a relationship. And
Yeah.
that's got more and more difficult, hasn't it?
Well, it has, because also I remember in my early career working in organisations where if you had a relationship with another member of staff, one of you had to leave.
Yes, absolutely.
Back in the day when it was personnel rather than HR.
Yes.
But you couldn't get away with that now.
Well, no, I mean, larger organisations, and certainly, let's say parts of the civil service or things like that, it's not uncommon still to reallocate somebody internally in such a
Mm.
situation. And there are some fairly good reasons for doing so, aren't there?
Well, yes, it can be, you know, so many problems regarding if one person is senior and the other person is more junior.
Mm.
Does the junior person get ahead with their
Favouritism,
career?
special
Um,
treatment.
yeah, exactly. And somewhere I worked once, that was the case. The division leader was in a relationship with one of the team members who
Mm.
reported to somebody else. And anytime she didn't like it, she moaned to her, who became her husband, and he told off the line manager. It was completely inappropriate.
Yes, yes. But most of the time, a relationship at work isn't necessarily a problem. I mean, the big problem, and actually, we've said about employers saying, not having relationship as a term of contract or in the staff handbook. Actually, more important would be to say people in a relationship can't break up when they work for us, wouldn't it?
I think that would be perfect, but I don't think we'd get away with it because it is, what was the data that came out this week? Was it 25% have had a romantic encounter with a colleague and 13% say they'd had an affair with a colleague?
Exactly, yes.
But
And
as you say, when it goes wrong,
yes, but the problem isn't them having a relationship. I mean, okay, there are minor areas, and we've touched on the favouritism, but the real problem is when they break up. And suddenly you find two parts of your team picking sides and
mm,
deciding who they favour, and an acrimonious split in their private life can create a very divided team in work.
yes, which makes performance very challenging. And
Mm,
so you can't performance manage them if they're still delivering on their work. They're just at each other's throats.
yes. So,
I
what can an employer do? What would you advise?
Well, I think really it's some form of coaching or
Mm,
support to enable them to work through their issue or mediation
yeah.
in order to help them work through their their issues.
Mm,
If you're a big enough organisation like the civil service, then obviously there is an opportunity to um, move
reallocate.
somebody,
Yeah,
reallocate
but
elsewhere.
I think actually even in a small organisation, in that scenario, as an employer, you need to find a way of separating two people who are at war with each other, which is often what may happen at that point.
And
Um,
yeah, there's potential for harassment, bullying, victimization in all of
yes,
this. It becomes very toxic. And if whoever got dumped, they're likely to be potentially not very pleasant.
Yes, yeah. Well, sadly, we know because of all the work that the lawyers make out of such things, these things aren't usually nice when they go wrong. And if it's happening in your office, in your warehouse, in your factory, it really needs some employer intervention and, dare I say, some employer engagement.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think also it's you need to be careful. You can't dismiss. We talked
Mm,
about that.
yep.
Unfair dismissal is the potential, but also, is there any unfairness or
Mm,
discrimination in, if one pair have a relationship and
yep.
split up, another pair have a relationship and split up, you have to make sure you're consistent and fair to
Yes.
everybody.
Yes, yeah, but it's about getting that right and having grown up conversations with people to
Yeah,
reduce impact in such scenarios, isn't it? Because
exactly.
as I say, you pretty much can't rule it out. There was the case, and I think if I recall correctly, it was the chief executive of, was it McDonald's last year? I think. Hope I'm getting that one right. But where somebody was dismissed for having a relationship with people where they did have such a rule, and they're just very problematic to have such rules in place now.
I think a lot of the problem with those big American companies that set up elsewhere is they think the law, as it applies to them over there, applies everywhere else.
Yes, that's more challenging always. And one of the
There's a
other
lot of
really
gigs
obvious
around
things,
that.
yeah,
So,
one of the other really obvious things that always strikes me on this, if you get into this situation, annual leave is another major problem. You may have a scenario where two people can't be on leave together, and actually, once they're a couple, that becomes a big problem. So there's quite a lot for an employer to get right here.
yes, and as you say, it goes back to our favourite term, employee engagement, and
Very much so. Very
you know,
much so.
but also it requires the couple to actually admit, if they haven't said and
Indeed.
seems apparent, but you don't know definitely,
Yes.
you've got to be careful.
And isn't it often HR that are the last ones to be told in such a scenario? So I guess the reality is one thing that you can do, and probably would be wise to do, was have a, whether or not it's a term of contract or a staff handbook rule, where in such a scenario it needs to be declared to the employer so that adequate safeguards can be put in place to protect the working environment.
Mm. Yes, and ideally, an organisation would put that in place as they start their business, but all too often, it's we're like the fourth emergency service, aren't we?
Yes.
It's,
Oh, it's
oh my
when it first
goodness, there's
goes
a
wrong,
crisis.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So absolutely. Whilst we're talking about all things Valentine's, did you see that tribunal of the florist delivery this week? That hmm.
Yes, unfairly dismissed without due process.
Well, what was really amusing, I can't find another word. I mean, sadly, being fired is never amusing. But the idea that an employer thought an acceptable way of notifying somebody of their dismissal was to hand them their P45.
Yes,
Um,
it isn't funny.
but it is actually. Yeah. But the idea that that's an acceptable way,
Mm.
and that this got to a tribunal before somebody saw that would actually be an unfair way of doing it. Um, I mean, no surprises to you and I there, clearly. I mean, if anyone put that case in front of us, we'd be saying, stop,
Yeah, don't
backpedal
you
as
dare
fast
do
as you
that.
can.
Yes, I mean, as I understand it, it was they decided to dismiss him because he wasn't maintaining appropriate contact with his employer,
Yes,
we'll say.
yeah. I mean, he was clearly failing spectacularly in his duties as an employee, his part of the relationship, but complete and total failure to communicate with the employer didn't give them acceptable reasons to dismiss him without a process and just by presenting a P45.
Yes, and as you say, the fact that he was not a top-notch employee,
Mm,
um, you know, resulted in his compensation being less, but it was
and
found
not a little bit less. And
50%.
a tribunal cutting the claim by 50%, which I understand what happened, because of failures on his part, is quite substantial. But the point is that doesn't make it okay to fail on due process.
Right.
And so if please, anyone out there doing something like that, please ring Kimberly or I first, and we'll help you avoid such a horrible situation. So, Kimberly, we're 10 minutes.
Wow, all
And
on flowers and Valentines. How lovely.
indeed. It's been lovely. Thanks so much. We're not doing this next week, are we?
No, I'm in London running a workshop.
Okay. Well, we will be back in 2 weeks then.
Look
Thanks for
forward to
watching,
it.
and we will catch up with you in a couple of weeks.